You have to pay the iron price. You have to pay the iron price. I'll never respect you while he lives.
Hey guys, it's Lady D, and I'm back for the third part of the GNA. At this point in the theory, the Ironborn are split into at least 3 groups. Group 1 has declared Euron their king. Most of these have left the Iron Islands, but there are still loyal Euron supporters on the Isles. Group 2 is the group that left with Asha and or supported her claim as queen. She should have loyalists on the Iron Isles as well, like Harlaw, and may also have more supporters than she may believe among Euron, judging on how the Queen's Moot was going before he blew the horn. Group 3 is the Forgotten Ironborn, those who went to the Torn Square with Dagmar Cleftjaw, who we supposedly never hear from. For the purpose of the GNA, let's take a look at the Ironborn, their behavior, and whose side they're really on. This is one of my favorite parts of the GNA because I just couldn't believe what was there in front of my face all along. Let's get into it. The Ironborn situation. The Ironborn are a part of the Grand Northern Ambition. I believe they have been since the fight in the Wintertown at Winterfell's gates when Ramsay Bolton burnt Winterfell and captured Theon. Of the 3 groups of Ironborn, 2 have a particularly aligning interest that also requires the cooperation of the North. Now, let's get started, really. If the text can be believed, we should trace the information of the sack of Winterfell through 2 main paths. Path 1 was established in GNA Part 1 and involves the survivors of the battle at Winterfell, Hodor, Bran, Meera, and Jojen, spreading information throughout the Wolfwood, and the clans being present at and witnessing the fighting. The clans are native to the area. After the fight, they would have guided fellow Northmen to safety. But with Squid sitting in the Wolfwood and flayed men asking after dead boys, it's safe to assume that the clans through this path would have learned of the true perpetrator of the battle from survivors and may have been able to piece together that the Boltons were truly behind that and the rumored murder of Bran and Rickon, which explains the little that warns them of the Boltons looking for them and the Ironmen in the Wolfwood. After all, if it were the Squids who killed the Starks, why are Bolton forces looking for them? Alive. Path 2 is through Rex Pike, Osha, and Rickon, the small folk from the Wintertown, and possibly broken men from the battle as well. Remember, they have all been running away from Ramsay. Since we already went over Path 1 in GNA Part 1, I won't bore you with the details. You get the gist, right? We'll go straight into Path 2. Path 2. Rex Pike, a pretty unassuming lad, right? I mean, besides the fact that he's supposed to be 12 when we meet him, but he's great with knives, an excellent tracker, damn good at math, and has information that both the North and the Ironborn need and want. Oh, and he's a Botley. He's pretty unassuming. So let's look at what we know about him. Rex Pike grew up on Pike and is a Botley bastard. He's also about 12 years old when we first see him. He's from Lordsport, so he should know his cousin Christopher Botley, aka the world's most decent Ironborn, and is his father Sargon Botley's only child. In short, he's a very smart boy from the largest port on the Iron Islands and is probably his father's prized possession. Do you guys really think he can't read and write? What use would he be to his father if he couldn't read and compute sums? They kind of run a port city. Because of his background, being a squire to Theon, would be an honor. Even if Theon is an ass, he is still Prince of the Iron Islands, technically. So Rex's deployment is an excellent way to keep an eye on Theon and have the Botleys further ingratiate themselves with House Greyjoy. So, tell me, does Rex sound like a stupid kid to you? I think we can all agree that the idea of a scared, mute 12-year-old in a foreign land following people who should see him as an enemy through enemy territory to tell Manderly, who is also an enemy, where his greatest bargaining chip is alone, even though he can't speak, read, or write, is pretty damn stupid. So what would a smart kid do? Let's try to figure that out knowing what we know of Wex. Let's try to figure out what really happened. First off, what does Wex know? For starters, Wex knows that every Northman alive should hate Theon and therefore the Ironborn right now. Wex should also know that there are Ironborn at Moat Cailin, the Stony Shore, and Deepwood Mott. And he's well aware that he'll have to escape at some point with or without Theon, especially once the Northmen arrive in the Wintertown. So at a minimum, as Theon's arguably loyal squire, our intelligent friend should have at least been thinking of an escape route in the event that the castle was taken. Do you guys remember getting lost in a grocery store or a department store when you were a kid? The hopelessness? Granted, you were probably younger than 12, yeah, but put yourself with that same feeling of dread in the middle of a hostile territory at 12. Your first thought is, how do I find my adult or adults? How will I ever get home? I'm going to have to live and die in the Walmart. In this case, the wolves would, but it's also dramatic. I would think that a scared little boy would try to get to the closest Ironborn he could. He'd go back where he saw them last, Stony Shore. In short, because this thing is just way too long already, I present this theory, lords and ladies. Wex Pike is an Ironborn operative of a GNA. In exchange for Asha, Theon, and land in the North, the Ironborn are prepared to fight with the North against the Iron Throne. If you have watched GNA Part 1, you know that there's a war of proxies going on. Effectively, Iron Throne means Lannister rule here and anyone who upholds it, which in the North means House Bolton, and in the Iron Isles will mean Euron Greyjoy for now. Yeah, I know. Where does this all come from? How are you possibly going to prove this one, Lady D? Well, to back this one up, I want to call out a few things. Number 1, there was no mention that the 10 men that Asha took with her to Winterfell that ultimately abandoned Theon arrived at Deepwood Motte ever again. 2, there is no mention specifically of Erzin and Styx, 2 of the named Ironborn who came to Winterfell with Theon that left before Ramsay attacked, arriving at Deepwood Motte. 3, by a storm of swords 76, the Ironborn have control of Torrhen Square, most of the Stony Shore, and by Asha's conversation with Victarion before the King's Moot, they have it securely, and apparently Sea Dragon Point as well. Number 4, by the Iron Captain chapter in A Feast with Crows, which occurs chronologically on the same day that Stannis arrives at the Wall, the North had already offered the Ironborn terms for peace that they accepted after the King's Moot. 5, Wex is 12 at the time of the castle burning and conveniently is absent from the appendix in A Clash of Kings, where he is introduced, and then disappears on page until we see him again with Manderly 7 months later. Yet, Wex appears in every appendix after A Feast for Crows as a member of Balon Greyjoy's household, until A Dance with Dragons, where the appendix lists him as a former squire of Theon Greyjoy and a member of Lord Manderly's household, meaning Wex made the switch in the prior book, just like when characters die, but they aren't listed as dead until the next book's appendix. Don't worry, as always, I'm going to prove all of this to you. The obvious question is, if Dagmar could not take Torrhen Square before, what enabled him to take it now? It is still a strong and fortified seat. The answer to that, and points 1 through 3, is the same. When the Ironborn left Winterfell, before the battle at Winterfell, they all ran for the Stony Shore, including Wex. He just left later. The Ironborn that left with Asha and stopped at Winterfell never returned to Asha in the books. It's not a stretch to think that they continued on to the Stony Shore to join the Cleftjaw. What other reason would they have to stay? Hell, what other reason did they have to come to Winterfell? They didn't try to help Theon and arguably poach Stig and Erzin. And speaking of Stig and Erzin, they don't show up at Deepwood, and they're not in the appendix for A Clash of Kings, but they are listed in A Feast for Crows as members of Balon Greyjoy's household. Then they disappear out of the appendix again. So they aren't dead after Ramsay burns Winterfell. Now, where could these men have gone? The 10 of them left Asha. Well, they left Deepwood with Asha, and then they stayed at Winterfell, but they weren't going to stay for the battle, and Asha knew that. That's why she told Theon that they were not going to stay for him. They were using Winterfell as some sort of way station between Deepwood Motte and the Stony Shore, a place to pick up men and provisions before Winterfell is attacked. As a matter of fact, a lot of men would have been doing this. Where's the evidence? Well, not only are they not dead according to the appendixes, and they don't show up at Deepwood, somehow Dagmar Cleftjaw gained enough strength that he was able to conquer Torrhen Square. Again, how the hell did he do that without significant strength? Stony Shore, and Sea Dragon Point, securely enough that Victarion literally laughs at any prospect of an alliance with the Northmen for Ironborn survival under Euron. By his account, the Ironborn already own that territory, but he's wrong, and Asha tries to show him that. And don't worry, I'll show you how in the next point. But at a minimum, I hope you can agree with me that the only way Dagmar could accomplish getting Torrhen Square is by gaining additional men from Asha and an advantage on the Northmen, like knowing they had all gone to retake Winterfell and were badly scattered or something. And there's only one person who could have told him that. How many additional men left Asha and headed to Torrhen Square and the shore, you ask? Well, about 700. Remember, Asha had 1,000 men take Deepwood, and it was not noted as a particularly bloody battle. Yet only about 200 or so swords were with Asha in the woods beyond Deepwood, where they ended up fighting Standish. Asha didn't take all of her ships back to the Iron Isles, so most of these men should have remained in the north, but they aren't at Deepwood Mott. There will be men on the ships, surely, but 800 of them? I'd rather wager that no more than 100 are across all four. So point number 4 is addressed best with a reading from the Iron Captain chapter in A Feast for Crows. To end this war before the war ends us. We have won all that we are like to win, and stand to lose all just as quick unless we make peace. I have shown Lady Glover every courtesy, and she swears her lord will treat with me if we hand back Deepwood Mott, Torrens Square, and Moat Cailin, she says. The Northmen will cede us Sea Dragon Point and all the stony shore. Those lands are thinly peopled, yet 10 times larger than all the isles put together. An exchange of hostages will seal the pact, and each side will agree to make common cause with the other should the Iron Throne. Victorian chuckled. This Lady Glover plays you for a fool, niece. Sea Dragon Point and Stony Shore are ours. Why hand back anything? Winterfell is burnt and broken, and the young wolf rots headless in the earth. We will have all the north as your lord father dreamed. When long ships learn to row through trees, perhaps. A fisherman may hook a gray leviathan, but it will drag him down to death unless he cuts it loose. The north is too large for us to hold, and too full of Northmen. So, there you have it. At some point, Sybil Glover approached Asha with terms on behalf of the kingdom in the north. We didn't see Asha answer on page, but all of a sudden the possibility of an Ironborn-assisted northern conspiracy doesn't seem too far-fetched, does it? For my last and final point, I'll establish that there is collusion between the Ironborn and the Northern Resistance Army. In the book, we lose sight of Wex after he gives Theon his bow, but in Manderly's recollection, he says that Wex saw Ramsay murder Cassell. If true, Wex would have had to have been on the battlements next to Theon, and by the time Ramsay slaps Theon and his men began killing everyone, Wex is already gone. He took a horse. How do I know? The only horse that comes out of the barn on fire is Smiler. There is no mention of any other horses, and Bolton's man fired the roof of the stable. They should all be kicking and screaming and running out of there like mad, making quite a racket, unless there's only one or a few horses left, which makes sense since at least 13 of them should be gone at this point. Remember, there are 10 men that came with Asha and then left. There were also Stig and Erzin and Wex. Now, Theon very well could have been looking around and noticing everyone dying and not noticing the horses wilding out, but I find that unlikely. And even if so, there is more. Now is a good time to look at the lie Manderly and George have concocted for Davos and the reader. First off, the story that Manderly tells us isn't really a story at all. At least not how the fandom interpreted it is. It's mostly us filling in the pieces as readers. Let's look at what Manderly and Glover actually say about Wex and Winterfell to Davos.
Was not a Stark, nor could he ever hope to pass for one. He was older than the young wolf's murdered brothers, 14 or 15 by the look of him, and his eyes were older still. Beneath a tangle of dark brown hair, his face was almost feral, with a wide mouth, sharp nose, and pointed chin. "Who are you?" Davos asked. The boy looked to Robert Glover. "He's a mute, but we have been teaching him his letters. He learns quickly." Glover drew a dagger from his belt and gave it to the boy. "What's your name, for Lord Seaworth?" There was no parchment in the chamber. The boy carved the letters into a wooden beam in the wall. W-E-X. He leaned hard into the X. When he was done, he flipped the dagger in the air, caught it, and stood admiring his handiwork. "Wex is Ironborn. He was Theon Greyjoy's squire. Wex was at Winterfell," Glover said. "How much does Lord Stannis know of what transpired at Winterfell?" Davos thought back on the tales he'd heard. "Winterfell was captured by Theon Greyjoy, who had once been Lord Stark's ward. He had Stark's 2 young sons put to death and mounted their heads above the castle walls. When the Northmen came to oust him, he put the entire castle to sword, down to the last child, before he himself was slain by Lord Bolton's bastard. Not slain, said Glover, captured, and carried back to the Dreadfort. The bastard has been fleeing him. Lord Wyman nodded. The tale you tell is one we all have heard, as full of lies as a pudding's full of raisins. It was the bastard of Bolton who put Winterfell to the sword. Ramsay Snow, he was called then, before the boy king made him a Bolton. We may never know all that happened at Winterfell when Sir Roderick Cassel tried to take the castle back from Theon Greyjoy's armed men. The bastard of Bolton claims that Greyjoy murdered Sir Roderick during a parley. Rex says no. Until he learns more letters, we will never know half the truth. But he came to us knowing yes and no, and those can go a long way once you find the right questions. It was the bastard who murdered Sir Roderick and the men of Winterfell, said Lord Wyman. He slew Greyjoy's armed men as well. Rex saw men cut down trying to yield. When we asked how he escaped, he took a chunk of chalk and drew a tree with a face. Davos thought about that. The old gods saved him. After a fashion, he climbed the heart tree and hid himself amongst the leaves. Bolton's men searched the gods wood twice and killed the men they found there, but none thought to clamber up into the trees. Is that how it happened, Rex? The boy flipped up Glover's dagger, caught it, nodded. Glover said, he stayed up in the tree a long time. He slept amongst the branches, not daring to descend. Finally, he heard voices down beneath him. The voices of the dead, said Wyman Manderly. Rex held up 5 fingers, tapped each one with a dagger, then folded 4 away and tapped the last again. 6 of them? Asked Davos. There were 6. 2 of them Ned Stark's murderous sons. How can a mute tell you that? With chalk, he drew 2 boys and 2 wolves. The lad is Ironborn, so he thought it best not to show himself, said Glover. He listened. The 6 did not linger long amongst the ruins of Winterfell. 4 went one way, 2 another. Rex stole after the 2, a woman and a boy. He must have stayed downwind so the wolf would not catch his scent. He knows where they went, Lord Wyman said. Davos understood. You want a boy.
When rereading the text like this, it's evident that Manderly's first line reads differently from the rest of this conversation, probably because those things are true, and he is comfortable divulging those specific things to Davos. Then Glover changes the subject and gets down to business, asking what Davos and therefore Stannis knows regarding the destruction of Winterfell. Also, it's kind of interesting that this entire exchange, including Wex, Davos, Manderly, and Robert Glover, takes a few pages, actually. But the only information we really are getting that supposedly comes directly from Wex are those couple of paragraphs. But Wex is still in the room. That means that Wex is trusted with every single part of this conspiracy. And I think that says a lot. Glover and Manderly basically tell Davos that it was really all Ramsay and paint him a really gruesome picture of Ramsay and life under Bolton rule as a whole. They are evoking an emotional appeal that is based completely on the truth, and they're also playing up the whole we hate bastard things, probably to try to schmooze him into pleasing, Stannis. They probably think that he also believes that the Lannister kids are bastards and that the whole Stannis camp has a distaste for them. So they're playing that up. They're definitely playing the game here. The next passage we review stands out for 2 reasons. The first being that Robert is saying we may never know half the truth, when they seem to have it all, really, between Wex, the survivors of the battle, the runaway girls from the Dreadfort that survived, and small folk refugees who are all in White Harbor. They should have everything, and they seem to outline it in those pages. Additionally, even though Wex is supposedly illiterate, He doesn't speak another language. He should be able to answer in things other than yes and no. He communicated with Theon in things other than negative and affirmative. He even helped with tracking. These last two passages are where Manderly's lie begins to unravel. Remember when Bran, Osha, Rickon, Hodor, Mira, Summer, and Shaggy Dog all did that circuit in Winterfell? Well, they saw the same things that Manderly mentions, with the exception of Roderick being killed by the Boltons. None of the other info had to be witnessed firsthand and could be surmised from reviewing the site at least 3 days later, which is what Bran and company do. Remember, Bran and Rickon were in Summer and Shaggy Dog for 3 days watching Winterfell burn and then smolder out. Let's review what everyone sees. Wex actually sees Roderick killed from the battlements. Bran notes the Winterfell men when he comes out of the crypts and immediately blames Theon. But Osha notes the Ironborn being killed and takes the time to flip one over and views the sigil. They also pass the Birdman with no weapon burned in front of the Sept, with his hands drawn up, looking like he was ready to punch anyone that came near him. But that could easily be someone on their knees, begging, shot with an arrow, and then burnt. But what's more important here for the unraveling of the Manderly lie is what they don't see. What they don't see is bodies in the Godswood. And what Bran and company don't see directly conflicts with Wex's supposed story and leads me to believe that he could not have been there when they left and must have used his tracking ability to piece this information together. Hell, we saw how he helped Theon when they were tracking Bran and Rickon. What stopped Wex from running and simply going back to Winterfell to track where everyone had gone? Especially if it were advantageous for him and the Ironborn to capture Bran and Rickon Stark. Stick a pin in that. According to Manderly, Wex sees Ramsay kill Roderick Cassell, witnesses the movements of the Bolton men through the castle, and then he books it up the Heart Tree and stays up there for a minimum of 2 days, maximum of 3. We know because Bran is in Summer watching Winterfell burn and smolder out for that long. Remember, Wex then supposedly follows Osha and Rickon somewhere and knows they ended up on Skagos because, I don't know. We won't get into the insane amount of information that Wyman and Robert would have us believe came from a mute teenager via a few games of charade and Pictionary. At this point, a lot of folk in the fandom feel like this story is bull, and I am no exception. But if nothing else I have said is convincing, or if it makes no sense, answer this. If the Bolton forces searched the woods twice and murdered who they found, why the hell didn't they find Maester Luwin? I mean, he literally dragged himself from the Great Hall where he got the spear shoved through his shoulder, all the way from the Godswood? Really? Not to mention, on Bran's circuit around Winterfell, the Broken Tower is unscathed, and so is the Godswood. Jojen mentions the power of living wood, but what about that tower? If you ask me, the Boltons basically tired of burning the place out and stopped just short of the already ruined Broken Tower and the Godswood. And this is evident by the fact that we have an unburnt Godswood and an unarmed and dying witness who can still spread the tale to passers-by. This means Ramsay's men didn't go inside the Godswood at all. Lord Manderly is lying. Additionally, if Wex was there, he would have counted 7 voices instead of 6. He counts 6, which is Bran and Rickon, Mira and Jojen, Hodor and Osha, because they, along with the wolves, are the only tracks he finds leading away from Luwin's dead body, which, if Wex was present in Winterfell when the gates were open, he would have seen Luwin stabbed, and he wouldn't have assumed that he was killed in the Godswood sweep. And again, if he was in the tree when everyone split up, he would have heard 7 people talking because Luwin was alive and speaking. And Manderly, he never tells us how Wex came to him, and gives no details on how Wex knows that Osha and Bran went to Skagos. And he's also leaving out the detail that his own forces were present at the battle at Winterfell and in the Wintertown. He should have men that would have returned home and should have told him the tale firsthand, although a little confused. So now that we've established that Manderly is lying and that Wex had to have left Winterfell before Ramsay's men did, and probably even before they entered Winterfell, I want to explain how he came to be a part of the Manderly household and a part of the GNA. Trust me, You have not seen the last of Wex Pike on page, but that's for a separate video. For now, we'll set the stage. The theory is pretty simple. Wex ran to the stony shore by tracking the other Ironborn and told them what really happened. Learning that the northern forces were broken and badly scattered, the Ironborn raced to attack a sparsely defended Torrhen Square and captured it. At this point, the Ironborn, like the rest of the North, should believe that Theon is dead, as Wex left prior to Theon being taken away. Remember, Wex was not in that tree. Once the Ironborn have Torrhen Square, 6 things happen within 6 months. 1. Sybil Glover visits 10 towers. 2. The King's Moot. 3. Wex becomes a Manderly ward. 4. Deepwood Mott falls. Lance Snow and Hagen's daughter also disappear too. Lance from the appendix in the Dance with Dragons, so he must have left Deepwood in the book prior, just like when people die and it shows up in the next book. But where did he go? And Hagen's daughter, she disappears from the page. We don't see her die. She should be captive at Deepwood, and Lance Snow, the bastard son of Hellas Homewood, mysteriously disappears before Stannis arrives apparently. Ironborn ships seized and burned on the Fever River, and then lastly, Moat Cailin falls. Following our text, it would appear that Sybil gave terms to Asha, who did not accept nor reject them on page. Sybil is then in prime position to have a discussion with the reader about these terms, as she is there with Asha until after King's Moot 2 months later. And Roderick accepts her terms. I'll show you. Before the King's Moot, the reader is aware that Asha will lose. Not enough people have shown up at 10 Towers to rally for her. Is it not feasible that the reader would have taken Sybil up on her offer? If so, this explains why by the time we see Wex again, he's already listed as a member of Manderly's household and seems quite comfortable in his and Robet's presence. Additionally, he is trusted enough to be included on the secret plan to have Davos go get Rickon. He's a hostage, he's a ward, and he's a willing participant of the GNA. Now, Sybil's terms were pretty straightforward. The Ironborn needed to give back Moat Cailin, which the reader could not control because those were Victarion's men. The only thing he could do is agree to sacrifice those men, which works for the reader because those Go Reaver types are exactly what he wants to get rid of. Not to mention, the reader basically proposes the same deal to Asha in a Kraken's Daughter chapter of A Feast for Crows, which he basically refuses. It's land we need, not clowns. With Stannis Baratheon and Tywin Lannister contending for the Iron Throne, we have a rare chance to improve our lot. Let us take one side or the other, help them to victory with our fleets, and claim the lands we need from a grateful king. The reader, Kraken's Daughter, A Feast for Crows. So by the time Euron is crowned and Roderick is telling Asha to flee and read up on the overturned King's Moot, he's already allied with the North through Sybil Glover, and I think this is apparent from the surprise attack on the Fever River right after Victarion leaves. The North can retake Moat Cailin without threat of reprisal from the Ironborn because the Ironborn at Moat Cailin, are undesirables. They are reavers, which makes them lean on the side of Euron. They are unnecessary for the reader, and a necessary sacrifice to solidify the deal. The North would have to had known that Victarion left and wasn't coming back because he sailed with Euron. Info that could have traveled from the Iron Islands. Additionally, Roderick knows Theon is alive. In the Kraken's Daughter chapter, Roderick asks Asha if she is sure Theon is dead. He hesitated. You are certain he is dead? I'm certain of nothing. And Asha tells him she is certain of nothing. How convenient that Sybil Glover is there to offer her deal, seeing as she would have knowledge of Theon's whereabouts from Manderly and Northern gossip. Think I'm assuming? Okay, Roderick didn't know Theon was alive in Kraken's Daughter, but by the time Euron is crowned 2 months later when he tells her to flee, it's the first time he specifically refers to Torgon the Latecomer, not in name, but telling Asha that there's only one way now, and to read the book. He's essentially telling her, you have no choice but to find Theon. She hasn't read the book yet, which doesn't matter because Ironborn survival is bigger than Asha's thirst for the Sea Stone chair, and Roderick knows this. If he still thought Theon was dead, he would not have stressed the importance of that book and the loophole again, specifically for the annulment of a King's Moot, because it would be an impossibility and thus useless. Essentially, at first, he asks her if Theon is alive. 2 months later, he tells her there's only one way to reverse a King's Moot, and that's Theon. He's already working with Sybil. But he can't tell Asha because she already said that she won't change her plans and that she plans on keeping Deepwood Mott. If he told her he made a deal with Sybil, then he'd have to tell her that he sold her and Deepwood Mott out. This is important. Ironborn would also have to give up Deepwood Mott as a part of the agreement. Unfortunately for Asha, the reader already sold her out. I say this because Sybil recognizes that Ironborn are her key to her children, and she gives them up anyway. In the title portion of this video, I surmise that the ransom she accepts is on behalf of the king in the north. Well, here it is. Sybil trusts her children will be saved because she trusts them with the reader, and she trusts the architect of these deals, Robert Glover and Wyman Manderly. All of a sudden, Sybil's praying makes so much sense, doesn't it? She's sharing information, and because Asha doesn't control Deepwood's maester, they can send messages to places that are too far to send someone to travel, including to the reader. The Ironborn have agreed to the terms that the North set forth, well, some of the Ironborn anyway. Those that have reason to hate Euron and or support Theon and or Asha, and the handsome ransom she has paid is Ironborn hostages taken to assure the safety of her own children, and to begin to solidify the alliance of the kingdom in the north and Trident, and the new kingdom of the Island Isles and Shore. But the complete solidification only happens after the King's Moot, and the news of it travels back to Torrhen Square. Remember, word was sent to Victarion about the death of Balon Greyjoy. It surely would have made it to Torrhen Square, and yet the great Cleftjaw did not enter a claim, nor did Bluetooth, and apparently they are both renowned. We know the Cleftjaw is at Torrhen Square. What about Bluetooth? We didn't hear or see them at the King's Moot. Is it not possible that they didn't come because they supported Theon and knew he may be alive? Asha didn't find his body, but the Ironborn at Torrhen Square are much closer. When they came back, they didn't find the body. They found 6 pairs of tracks that Wex would be all too familiar with. Yeah, Torrhen Square, where you have men that supported Balon Greyjoy and through him Asha and Theon. You see, Manderly had info from his own men that the Ironborn were attacked by a bastard of Bolton, and that the girls that survived Ramsay's hunt, as well as anyone who runs away from the Dreadfort, should be able to tell Manderly and company, Theon is definitely alive, and thus the idea of an alliance with the Ironborn takes shape, which is why the author comes to Asha before the King's Moot. The architects knew that Theon was alive and were offering terms to the Ironborn holding castles in the north via their agents within those castles. The Ironborn knew that Rickon and Bran were alive because of the tracks. The Littles at least can corroborate Bran is alive, which gives the Ironborn legs, and the women who escaped Ramsay can again describe Theon to the Ironborn. The King's Moot happens 3 months before Manderly sends Davos after Rickon, meaning the Ironborn came to some consensus with the North well before Davos shows up about 3 to 4 months after Winterfell is burned. That's how Manderly got Wex. Someone would have had to speak on his behalf because he's Ironborn. He would not have arrived alone or unexpected. It's all a part of this deal. Still don't believe me? I can't blame you because this is a lot, but consider this. According to a handy A Song of Ice and Fire map exercise here, an awesome member of the fandom created, we are able to calculate distances based on triangulation. So in short, Castle Serwyn is 100 miles away from Winterfell, and in the book it's described as a half day's ride from Winterfell. Torrhen Square is 230 miles away. So if the Ironborn were at Stony Shore and had some outriders around Torrhen Square because they were trying to take it anyway, and noticed these men leaving, if the large portion of Ironborn left the Stony Shore and went towards Torrhen Square, Wex could have easily met up with them. If they met up, then that means that it would have taken round trip for Wex about 3 days to make it back from Winterfell. If it takes the Ironborn 2 almost 3 days round trip to return to Winterfell from Torrhen Square, then they would have gotten there a day plus some hours, maybe even a day and a half to 2 days after Bran and company left Winterfell. Now it makes sense why Wex would track the smaller party. They would be easier to capture. A giant guy like Hodor and a direwolf plus Lethal Mira seem like a much harder capture than Lethal Osher, a direwolf and a kindergartner. Oh, and just to drive the point home that the North is in with the Ironborn at Torrhen Square, explain why no one lays siege to it. No one even mentions taking it back, yet there are Northerners held hostage there. And it's close, way less than half of a day by boat. Manderly has more than enough ships to allow this, yet there seems to be no urgency surrounding Free and Torrance Square, and yet Tall Heart men have joined Ramsay, even though Adara Tall Heart is still hostage at Torrance Square. So to recap, the Iron Bank, the Rogue Lords of the North, and the Rogue Lords of the Iron Isles and Shore all seem to be collaborating in the liberation of Winterfell, restoration of Stark power, and or the liberation of the North as a whole, and a smash of Bolton rule. The pieces are spread about, but I believe this video presents this portion of the theory well by pulling them together and establishing a timeline. I know the Ironborn specifically are difficult to imagine as a part of the Stark restoration, but the evidence is there. So buckle your seatbelts, guys. It's been great getting back. These past few videos have been really intensive, and it's been a lot of research. So let me know in the comments if you guys liked it, if you enjoyed the video, if this totally blew your mind about the Ironborn, if you're looking forward to Stannis. Just give me your feedback. I really enjoy it. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe. And if you would, please like and share this throughout the realm. I'm Lady D, and this is part 3 of the GNA.